everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and we will discuss on do we have free will? We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Schumacher, Professor David Smith, Mr. Adam, and Professor Fred Philip. First, I would like to give chance Professor David Schumacher.
Well, hello, Sharif and everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to go first. So, free will. I guess Sharif had free will to decide who got to go first, right? Okay, maybe that's a great place to start. Now, as I was thinking over the topic, I was looking at this first from a scientific point of view. Newton's clockwork universe, Einstein's space-time block universe. Both of those are deterministic scientific theories of how the universe works. One perhaps improving on the other, but both of them still deterministic. And deterministic at its logical conclusion means that you start with something, perhaps the Big Bang, and everything from there can be determined. If you can figure any particular starting point, you should be able to determine everything that goes out from that. If we apply that to creatures like us, then that would mean that we don't have free will. Maybe it just means that we think we do. But I also prefer to look at it from another way. Intuitively, it seems like I have free will. I have ever since I've been a kid, within the limits of what my parents set or whatever other limits that I might have. There were things I could choose to do or not do or so forth. So that we have this intuitive look. So those choices that I think that I have are limited by what physical ability, maybe my mental processing ability, what my education choices are, but I also think that they're also come inherited. For example, what I decide to have for breakfast today, that's a choice. But how free of a will choice is that? To have breakfast or not, that's binary, but what I eat is a lot more granular than that. And it comes being passed down from the culture that I came in, the culture that my parents came in, food that they could afford to buy, food that I've bought and become accustomed to. All those things limit those choices. Maybe even built into our physical connection. I prefer the taste of this food over another food. Is that a free will choice? I decide not to eat something because I don't like the taste of it. So there's a lot of gray that's tied to that. Plus, what I read in books about food or see in TVs and movies, or even what religious texts might tell me about food might limit my choice. So, is that free will? So, here's how I look at it. I take a look at the scientific approach and say, so far at this level between Newton and Einstein, that's deterministic. But then when you start looking at the quantum world and you look at the nature of the observer and so forth, that implies perhaps there is some willful action there. Is it a particle? Is it a wave? Science is still out on this, exactly how to define whether we have that or not. So going back to the intuitive, I look at myself daily riding a wave, if you will. Maybe think of it as a surfer on a wave. And what's the wave? The wave is all the previous decisions that I've made, all the cultural and other inheritance that I've had. And this wave is moving forward. And if I'm skillful, I can surf this wave perhaps with some grace. And I certainly have some will as far as that's concerned, but the wave is pushing me along. So it's a partnership between this forward push from past experience and past decisions to what I want to make now. Of course, if I fall off the surfboard, then I'm tossed around by all kinds of choices until I get back on and catch the next wave. So, do I have free will? My answer is sort of.
Thank you. Professor David Smith.
Well, David's given me a good place to put free will down as a keystone here because we can do it. But to me, free will has so many different elements into it, and at the simplest level, it's just the capability of people, agents, whatever you want to do, to choose between different possible courses of action unimpeded. And unimpeded is a real important part of it because many people take free will and link it to moral responsibility, praise, culpability, deliberation, prohibitions, and others. But I like going back and looking where see free will happening. And really, I remember in college going back and reading Plato and the Republic, where he really said that the rational, spirited aspects of humans who strive for inner justice, which is a condition which puts them at the roles for their own free spirit to work and do things and for their passion. And then you see Aristotle doing the same thing when he gives a lot of attention to the role of choice and individual actions. And over time, they become habits, good or bad. And, free will is kind of like that. Free will is an internalization of how you and your ethos and your id and your ego all work together to determine what are the elements that you believe and can act upon. Because free will without action is dreaming. And you've got to begin to put actions behind free will to have it really be something that is in, has an impact on you, has an impact on society, has an impact on those around you. And free will is such a great concept. But with free will comes also responsibility because you do not live in the isolations of the cave. And the cave does have lights, and the lights shine upon you and your free will, and those lights interact, your shadows interact with others. And, going back to the ancient Greek uh, thought there, that is how free will still works today. Is that we're in this cave and we have those lights and those shadows interact and we can act for our free will can act for good, it can act for bad, it can act for in self-interest, it can act in our free will action to support others. So it's a concept which I love to go forward with, and I thought David did a great job of beginning to put some of the areas around it. But you know if I just go back and see how the concept of free will has changed since the time of the ancient Greeks, it hasn't changed that much. Technology doesn't really impact free will. We see social constructs impact free will, like the different philosophers, you see different religions, you see different ways of thought begin to impact free will. And it's more of the concept of how the individuals interpret those as they choose their own unimpeded action going towards their free will decisions than anything else. But Sharif, I could this for the rest of the day and go back and talk about the other scholars and even some of the current ones, as David rightly put out. The concept of quantum is beginning to be applied to free will because free will tended to be binary, but we're seeing now more and more places where different elements of free will can be in multiple states at the same time, just like if I was in a quantum environment. So that's my initial thoughts, Sharif. Great topic today. Like I said, if you get me too started, there might not be time for anybody else. So I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, Professor. Mr. Adam.
Thank you, Sharif. Yes, I do believe in free will. I do believe that free will exists and that we have it. However, I do not believe that it is the only influencing force in our lives. And how strong one's free will is can vary from person to person. Either they have a strong will or a weak will, but I do believe it exists. But of course, there are complications. For instance, when I think of consciousness, the mind, free will, I immediately think of self-reference, feedback, infinite regression, like what Douglas Hofstadter wrote about in his books. He used the analogy of video feedback, where you have a camera and plug it into a TV, then point the camera at the screen, and then you get all these visual feedback patterns. So if I think to myself, I will raise my right arm up, where is the genesis of the intention, of the thought, of the instruction to myself to do it? Does the spark coincide at the same time as when I think I will or does the spark, the genesis of the thought, precede even saying to myself, I will do this or that? Does it start at the beginning or before the instruction? Or does some event that precedes even thinking about the instruction inspire the birth of the instruction? So I will raise my arm, and then I will say to myself, I will raise my arm, and then I will think to say to myself, I will raise my arm, and what is making me think about saying to myself, I will raise my arm, and so on and on. It's infinite regression. So free will is paradoxical as self-reference and self-similarity usually are. But I think there is some level of existence where paradoxes are resolvable. We just don't have the faculties to sense that yet. It might be so paradoxical that it's too beyond our means to construct free will ourselves in AI. But the only way we could know for sure in the future is mind melding and thalamic bridges and things like that. So, but yeah, infinite regression and such, that then highlights the issue of predeterminism. I believe in free will, but situations, forces, influences that exist or transpire from before I was born already shape my destiny, and more than most people are willing to admit, I feel. Like, I describe myself as a writer, a wordsmith, so if I become a famous writer someday and I was being interviewed and the interviewer asks me, what advice would you give to young writers now? I would struggle with answering that, but I would answer honestly that a lot of my life, my destiny, where I am now, where I was, where I will be later, was influenced by things that happened to me. Good things, bad things, traumatic events, things out of my control, way beyond my control, like clinging onto a raft lost at sea during a storm, like David Schumacher described with waves. But on that raft, we do have freedom of choice within limitations shaped by forces more powerful than man. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Fred, can you hear me?
Yes, I had to log in on my phone because the Mac connection wasn't working. You can hear me now, yes? Is it my turn? Okay. Let me see. The parts of David and David's presentations on this topic I appreciated very much. They're diverse. I think I'm going to introduce still another perspective on this. As a matter of fact, I wrote this book a couple of years ago, and one of the chapters has to do with exactly this topic. So if it sounds like I'm reading to you rather than speaking to you, for some passages, yes, I'll be reading to you. But you wonder, why does this topic come up in the context of a book on martial art? And the answer is that Aikido is supposed to be the art of peace. Its practitioners are compassionate people, think of themselves as ethical. It's a martial art that is aimed at protecting oneself while inflicting absolutely minimal damage on an attacker. So people like that who practice this art, think of themselves as good people, and they wonder why bad things happen to people. Why the universe is set up so that bad things happen to good people. So I want to come at the topic of free will through this question of why bad things happen to good people. It's a very terrible question, but it's a universal question. And I think there's no really satisfying answer but getting a perspective on it is really necessary because there's so many bad things going on. We have terrorist attacks, we have epidemics, we have school shootings, we have loss of young lives in wars. And so let me structure the question like this in terms of why bad things happen. Let's make a taxonomy of bad things. So I will enumerate three kinds of bad things. First, one person might intentionally harm another person. Okay. Second, a person could be harmed while intentionally taking a risk, for example, mountain climbing. Okay. And the third way is classically caricatured by a piano falling from an upper window onto a passerby. And the nature of that third kind of bad thing is that nature without intention might do a job on an unsuspecting innocent. So each of these three kinds of bad things makes us unhappy. Okay, and the key to understanding the first two kinds, intentionally harming another person or being harmed while intentionally taking a risk, these have to do very much with the question of free will. So to make this clear, let's make another list of three. Let's construct three imaginary worlds, and each of these imaginary worlds has a different rules about free will. Okay. You ready? In the first of these worlds, there's no free will at all. So who's going to be happy? Okay, see, we now have a link between free will and happiness. Because being a puppet on a string in the kind of deterministic world that David Shoemaker described to us, it's just no fun. All right. Now, in the second of these imaginary worlds, only one person has free will, and the rest, everyone else in the world, are deterministic puppets. So even if the one free person in the world is the puppet master, that person's not going to experience any surprises, no personal growth, ultimate boredom, right? So the first two worlds don't sound so good. Let's make a third world where everyone has free will except one person. Okay, now that one person who has free will, the one person who does not have free will in this third world fears being powerless. Yeah, he hates his inability to do anything to help himself or to help others. Okay, now I have to parenthetically say that fear and hate might not be possible without free will, but this is our thought experiment, so we can make the rules. Okay, this third imaginary world, actually, it can sound very much like our own everyday world. Where it seems like everybody has free will except us. Okay, so we respond to that by trying to become more powerful. In some of my students' cases, they try to become more powerful by signing up for Aikido classes. Okay, so now, as David Smith has implied, we have a tie between free will and ability and action. Okay, so we've established a link between free will and happiness, and now we have a link between free will and our ability to take action. That's a very understandable inclination for people to have. And yet, no matter how rich you are, somewhere else somebody's richer. And no matter how strong you are, somebody else is stronger. And you may be a terrifically abled person, but governments and corporations may stomp on you anyway, and there's nothing you can do about it. So that's to say that some kinds of powerlessness are inevitable. Yeah. And fearing your powerlessness is therefore just a waste of time. So our security in life lies what's in our hearts, not in what's our muscles or in our wallets. So a better use of our free will would be to choose how we think, how we treat our families, our friends, our neighbors. So the imaginary worlds exercise that we just did shows that if one person has free will, then everyone else should too. That's not only fair, but I think it's what thinking people really want. Unfortunately, though, to enjoy free will is to accept that some people may decide to harm other people. I mean, we don't need to get into a deep philosophy discussion about the nature of evil. Free will just means the freedom to decide between a right action and a wrong action. And it also means your freedom to take to indulge in very risky adventures, to climb the Himalayas or to investigate the Bermuda Triangle or enlist in the military in wartime, whatever. Free will would be meaningless if we didn't have also the ability to know or to estimate the consequences, the likely consequences of our actions. Okay, so for many varied reasons, to save another life, to find new resources, or just to feel more alive or to explore something, people willingly embrace significant probabilities of injury or death. And this is our freedom. And these adventurous people would probably argue that people who stay at home in bed risk a lot too, because stay-at-homes risk the loss of their physical health and the loss of their social life. They risk missing opportunities to take on responsibilities and just to experience the variety of the world that they were born into. So at the beginning of my talk here, I mentioned three kinds of bad things that can happen to people, and I think we've covered the two that have to do with free will. So this only leaves the third question: what about the hurricane, the earthquake, the falling anvil that wipes out ordinary, intelligent, loving, risk-averse people who have plans and hopes for their future? Well, if we apply cold logic to this very emotionally charged question, it might be an unattractive thing to do, but the fact is that question involves circular reasoning. Life is fragile, and for that reason, we consider life to be precious. So far, so good. But then we muse, life is so precious. What a tragedy that it's as delicate and vulnerable as it is. So, yeah, people are going to get wiped out by hurricanes and by cartoon anvils falling from the second story as you pass by on the sidewalk. But we managed to make life's fragility a desirable state of affairs. We're attracted to a potential spouse because of his or her vulnerability. We enjoy actors and comedians who reveal the vulnerable everyman. You know, a couple of movies they're old movies. I don't know if people will recognize them. There's The City of Angels with Meg Ryan and Nicolas Cage. Do you remember that one? And Highlander with Christopher Lambert and Sean Connery. These feature immortal characters whose biggest wish is to become mortal and fragile, like the rest of us. So they want to have free will and embrace risk. So now we have also a connection between free will and action, but between free will and deliberately risky action. So it gives rise to a genre of humor that we call absurd humor. And this is why an anvil falling on a cartoon character is funny. Yeah. So anyway, anything can happen. Our lives are fragile, in many ways uncontrollable. Sometimes we laugh at absurd humor, because it makes us nervously uncomfortable. And sometimes we laugh with joy because we realize there's nothing we can do with it. So let's just get on with living. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Fred, Professor Donald. Mr. Donald.
Yes. Well, free will means a lot of different things to a lot of people, as you can plainly see. And I want to approach it from starting a kind of a physical sense, the way that Adam did a little bit more, and then build a little bit on it, because it's important to remember that we don't act on the world. We act on our stories about the world. And so free will is really nothing that we talk about are really that people do are really causes. It's explanations to a much, well, I shouldn't really say nothing, but to the major degree, they're explanations. So free will is an explanation and not a cause. And I think that it's interesting. I love Adam's example about raising your arm. I've got a coffee cup here, and I'll probably drink some coffee during the course of this. Do I think to myself, I'm going to raise my arm and grab the coffee cup? No, I don't. I don't even know I'm doing it. I mean, it's just something that happens to me, right? And that's the way we act. We act first, and then our brain afterwards makes us think that we caused that action. And we know this now very well because we can do fMRI and other ways that we can monitor what the brain is doing. And we know for sure that the muscular, the part of the brain that's causing the arm to move is operating before the person thinks that they're commanding it to do it. I mean, the sequence is wrong. The people think that they're so in some sort of sense, in that very mechanical sense, we don't really have free will. We're not really commanding ourselves what we do. And you can see that in a matter of life. I mean, how many people have tried to lose weight, quit smoking, get more exercise, stop getting angry at certain kinds of things? You tell yourself to do it, you will yourself to do it, but it doesn't work because because it's not you're not controlling the situation. We're animals, and free will from a mechanical sense is not really happening. Philosophically, it's an interesting point because free will, in one simple philosophical sense, is contrasted with determinism. And so if you look philosophically, you can look at Comte and Spencer. And Spencer, for instance, had this idea that if we could measure things carefully enough, we could predict everything. So that the world was just a set of atoms and everything else all doing together. And if we could scientifically look at these carefully enough, we could predict what was going to happen next, and that everything was deterministic. And Comte also, in his positivism, led towards that. And they're both the two people that are credited with inventing the term sociology. And so some religions believe that. I know that that's somewhat true in some versions of Islam, that the belief is that our lives are predetermined. Our own free will isn't something that's going to change anything. And Calvinism also believes that. So the way that leads into what I'm saying about how free will then becomes sort of I don't know, it's a story that's kind of an unfortunate story in a way, because if you take the example of Calvinism, in Calvinism, they believe that whether you go to heaven or hell and whether is already determined. So there's nothing you can do on earth that's going to change whether you go to heaven or hell. And so being a good person doesn't change anything. And so the people in that belief try to figure out, well, how do you know if a person is a good person, is going to go to heaven or go to hell? And the system that they came up with is, well, if they're blessed on earth, then they must be that they're going to be blessed in heaven. They're just blessed. So therefore, if you're rich and healthy and good looking, then therefore you're going to go to heaven. But if you're poor and sick and unhappy, then you're going to go to hell. And so there's absolutely no incentive for helping poor people because they're damned anyway, and they're bad people in the first place. And that's kind of the American system. And so free will can have a kind of it's a story that we tell about people, and a story that we say, well, the reason that this person's poor is because they made bad decisions, and the person is they're not intelligent. We come up with these stories that are based on the concept of free will, and we then start neglecting the degree that we're actually part of all of social relations that are incredibly influential in who we are and how we make decisions. There's been studies that show that if you take a group like a jury, and juries, there's actually people who do this for a living, and you can take the hierarchy inside of the jury, a group of people, and you can figure out from the social relations within the jury, you can predict almost for sure how it's going to decide. So when we make decisions, we're not making decisions based on something inside of ourselves. We're making decisions based on a complicated set of things that include the social relationships that we have with other people. So it could be, in a sense, to say that we don't really have free will in kind of a mechanical sense, but then we do have the ability to decide we're going to go to college. We do have the ability to decide we are going to finish this work that we need to do today. We do have the ability to do things in our lives that make our lives better and the lives of other people around us, even things that we don't really want to do. We can make ourselves do them because we know that there's going to be some future advantage to it. So in that sense of there's another sense of free will that can be useful and beneficial. But as the conclusion is that, as you can see, there's a lot of different meanings to free will, and I think that it's an interesting topic. But for each person personally, I think it's really worth realizing that our ability to, the amount of free will we have is pretty limited, and we should all be aware of that.
Thank you. Mr. Markley.
Like I said, it just popped in. I hear y'all talking about free will, and definitely I went to a Jesuit university, so I know that free will was oftentimes talked in that space, and it definitely was talked about the nature of humans to make their own decisions, even though a lot of people around the world will say that there is a higher power of one sort or another that exists and gives us that autonomy and the free will in order to make decisions on our own. And, whether we choose to make conscious decisions that are good for the benefit of all mankind, or whether we choose to make decisions that are not that beneficial either for our own personal life or whatever, then yes, we do have that kind of free will. I mean, I literally could walk into a store and I would have the decision to either buy the item or to take the item. Now, if I take the item, there are consequences for taking the item that law and others would put out there and everything. So it is my free will decision every day that I go into a store to actually pay for the item, because that is the moral and correct thing to do. There are other people that might go into that store and have a whole nother mindset. They may be like, look, I can snatch it, I can grab it, and nobody will be the wiser. And they have the free will to do that, but they do face the consequences if they do that and they get caught, because that is one of those free wills. And even along those same lines, yes, we got the free will to talk to a young lady and to court that young lady. She's also got the free will to say no if you're trying to court her for romantic interest and all in that space. So sometimes the free will of two individuals can be at conflicts with each other, and they don't have to be even a threat, even though at the time that you are being rejected, you may take it as a threat, and all along those lines. So that's kind of the way that I think of free will. And definitely we have to think of the consequences that are out there with the decisions that we choose to make. So yes, you have the free will to do any of those things that you choose to do, but you also have to think about the laws of man and the laws of the universe as well, because sometimes the universe can slap us in the face as well, because I do believe in the power of the universe and the fact that if karma is a real thing. So if you do something wrong and things along those lines, karma can come back and slap you back in the face. And that's just kind of my belief system, which is why I choose to do things that I consider to be very ethical and very right, and all in that space. Now, somebody else may not be as ethical, and they may choose to do some things that are totally wrong, or that we feel are wrong by society standards, but they have the free will to do it. Of course, they might have to face the consequences if they choose to do something that is going against the morals and the thoughts of mankind. So that's kind of the way that I've always thought about free will. And I'm sure that some people that are on this panel that can think much deeper than I can might have some counters to the examples that I gave, and all along those lines. But that was just some of my automatic thoughts about free will. And like I said, I did go to a Jesuit university, and I had the free will to choose to go to that university because I found that it was a great university to go to. And I learned a lot about critical thinking while I was there, and got a second minor. And the things that I jokingly say, and I'm sure David and both Davids will get a kick out of this and everything, is that when I was at Marquette, you had to get a certain amount of hours that were philosophy and theology, and you had to get almost that amount for your actual minor. So I could major in journalism, minored in poli-sci, but if you got 21 hours of credits out of 128, as far as I'm concerned, that's a minor. And that's how many hours they required in theology and philosophy at that fine Jesuit university. So what do you think, Adam? 21 hours? Doesn't that sound like a minor to you in the philosophy and the theology? Because it sure sounds like it to me, but they required that. So I guess I had the free will not to take those courses, but it was a requirement. So I would not have got the degree that I wanted either. So that's just some of the thoughts that I have about free will and how it can impact us in our lives. But that's just a couple of quick thoughts, and I'd love to hear back from some of the others as well.
Thank you. Mr. David Schumacher, what's your final thoughts about today's discussions, and what is your advice for our students?
Okay, so two things there. First off, I want to say thanks to the panel. Everybody had something really great to put in. By the way, Mark, the first degree that I got, most of my electives were history. So people looked at my thing and thought I was a history major when everything else was science and math. So I don't know, maybe that was a minor as well. Anyway, where I want to go is back to where I started with, and that is the surfer and the wave. And I equate that to the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. And most people will tell us that study these things that the subconscious mind is far more vast than the conscious mind, what we think about every day. And why is that important? My heart is beating while I'm sitting here, and I'm not telling it to do so. And I'm not trained or skilled to be able to tell my heart to say stop and start when I want it to. Yet, my breathing, I can do that. I breathe without thinking about it, but then under certain conditions, I can consciously decide when to breathe or not. My career. Some would say that I chose my career. I might say that my career chose me because those were my interests, those were my passions. I elected to go after training and work and experience in those areas. Was that free will? Did I choose that career or did that career choose me? Same thing can be said about romance. Mark Lee made a comment about romance, and I'm not so sure which side of romance is free will or how much is just involuntary response, because that's what's inside me. And even morals might fit that way. A lot of that is culturally indoctrinated. Morals change slightly from society to society, even though that there is a core area that we all seem to agree on. But do we all agree on that consciously? Or is that just something that's built into our fabric or handed down through 200,000 years of evolution? So how much of free will that we have is an illusion? If it's just what's in what we think of as the conscious mind, then any free will that we do have would be very small, and the rest is pretty much on autopilot. And maybe that's okay, because maybe that really small is like power steering in a car. That really small amount of free will drives the whole machine and takes us where we want to go. So, what I would say to your students, Sharif, to try to be brief, is what free will we think we have or we do have, it's important to utilize the best that we can and to live within the standards of morals and society and to try to find a way to make things better. So don't get deluded by whether we have free will or not. Use what you think we have to the best of our ability, and that's where I'll leave it.
Thank you. Professor David Smith.
Love the discussion, and particularly as Mark and others and David have talked about the academic influences. I haven't spoken about this at all, but I was fundamentally changed with my career, the way I looked at life, my free will, by a program I was selected to be part of my freshman year of college. I was selected to be with 21 other students who we did not have classes. The professors came to us. And the program was called the Inquiry Program. We had no textbooks. We used original source material for everything. So yes, we actually did go back and read the writings of Plato, Aristotle, all the great scholars. And we were taught how to synthesize information from that using the inquiry approach. And the inquiry approach is actually very, very similar to what we see with the concepts we've discussed today with free will. Because and I'm going to synthesize my free will. And I can tell you, the year doing that with these other students, one of the hardest years of my life, academia, because all of us students were either valedictorians or salutatorians of our high school class. And not having textbooks, not having standardized tests, it was hard. We even as freshmen formed study groups because they gave us so much stuff to go through. But the ability to look critically and synthesize what is the outcomes is the basis of free will. And it's the basis of being able to take your own free will and make it for good versus making it for bad. And that's really my concluding remarks here, is that free will, I agree, we have it. It's shaped by our influences. It's shaped by our worldviews. It's shaped by others around us. But at the end of the day, It's how we take it and synthesize it and apply it to ourselves that make the difference. So, Sharif, thank you so much for letting me be part of this one. And this is a great topic.
Thank you, Mr. Adam.
Thank you, Sharif. Yeah, another complication with free will is the multiverse. Universes branching off from one another according to the choices we are confronted with. For example, if I am confronted with two roads in front of me, one going left, the other going right, then the timeline might branch off into three parallel timelines where in one I go left, in another I go right, and in a third I don't go down either. And then of course we could say there might be a fourth where I turn back, and a fifth where I take off into the air or something, and so on and so on. So if all choices are fulfilled anyway, does that then cancel out freedom of choice and free will if there is a parallel timeline branching off at every choice we are faced with? Philosophy of mind with regards to animals and non-humans is an interesting consideration as well. Of course, we have orders and orders of higher and lower life forms, humans, dolphins, chimps, cats, dogs, down to insects and worms, and down further to cells and viruses. But just from simple visual observation, my intuition tells me that free will exists in dolphins, chimps, cats, dogs. But I could not honestly say that cells and viruses have it. I would say they do not. Worms and insects, tricky one that. So there must be a cutoff point or a distinct level where free will emerges going up the pyramid of sentience and sapience, or disappears if you go down it. But it's strange that something can be alive without free will if it's far down enough. It's quite an unsettling thought. Another consideration is the influence of unseen forces, another unsettling thought. A good example is parasites. For example, the fungi that take over insects and turn them into zombies, and you've probably seen those really macabre photographs of mushrooms growing out of the corpses of insects. Also, Toxoplasma gondii influencing rodents to have a dampened fear of cats, making them more likely to get eaten so the microbe can reproduce in the cat's intestines. And parasites that have behavioral influences on humans as well. So does simply knowing about the existence of such things create a kind of anti-placebo effect that helps to resist the influence of such things and to keep free will consistent throughout? Who knows? And David Schumacher said another thing I really liked. Did you choose your career or did it choose you? I know I have had similar feelings and questions about myself and my own life very often. Did I choose to be creative, artistically inclined, a writer, or did they all choose me? Did the muses, as written about in Greek mythology, choose me or bless me, or am I here for a reason? Yes, I think, because before I described humans and orders of lower and lower life forms below as going down, so surely there must be orders above us going up and up the ladder of more intelligence, more and more sentience and sapience. So AI, muses, gods, goddesses, who knows? But yeah, thank you, Sharif. Great topic, and thanks for asking me to be on it.
Thank you. Professor Donald.
I love what everybody's been saying. It's really always really interesting to listen to these great folks. Well, I want to kind of go back to what I was saying, and I think David Schumacher said it in a really good way, which is that our conscious mind is very, very small, and mostly what we do is unconscious. So it goes back to the thing, did you choose your career or did it choose you? And there's a lot of studies that show that people are going to wind up doing that's like what they're born into, in a sense, because like I grew up in a house that was full of books. Both my parents went to college. Everyone I knew went to college. I mean, it was never a question that I was going to go to college. I mean, it wasn't even a question. I mean, but I have a friend who actually I admire incredibly, and he grew up his father lived in Cabrini Green, which was at one time the absolute worst housing project in the United States. It was in Chicago, and he managed to get a job working for the post office, and he moved into Inglewood in South Chicago, which is a minor step up. And this is where the guy was raised. He said, boy, I wish I was like you, because I could have gone out of my house and played, but it was too dangerous. Our parents never let us out of the house. Somebody was shot under our bathroom window and killed. And yet somehow he went to college. But I mean, that's a really interesting exception to the rule, because he said everyone I grew up with is dead or in jail. And that's just I'm kind of emphasizing that to a large degree we have an illusion of free will. There's really interesting studies that have been done that showed that twice as many people named Dennis are dentists than any other people. People have a tendency to move to cities that are their last name. And I said, well, that's silly, because I'm Steiny. Why am I in Palo Alto? And I was off Stanford. And I was just like, I said, wow, that's really weird. And then they also found out that there are twice as many women in Georgia named Georgia than average. And they asked the question, well, is it just because people in Georgia named their daughters Georgia? So they did extensive studies on their income tax records and birth records, and they found no, they actually moved to Georgia when they have the name Georgia. So there's all these things influencing us that we just don't even really know. And I think what's kind of interesting is, to me, is to see if you can start unpacking and finding all these influences that kind of make us, because as I said before, we can decide to go to college. We can decide to finish writing the paper that we're doing. We can decide to do things. It's not like we have no free will. But on the other hand, I think that if we look at philosophies, some of the philosophies from the East are probably more appropriate, because the Buddhists have the idea of Maya, the veil of illusion, and the idea that we're really operating in an illusion, and that kind of what brings you to a better place is to start being able to realize and see the illusion that we're in, and the illusion that the illusion that we're in. And I think the benefits of it is that when we think too much of free will, like we give free will too much credit, it has a tendency to make us blame people, blame ourselves, and do a lot of things that just really aren't real. They're stories, and they hurt us and they hurt others. So it's wonderful, to use your abilities and your choices and make choices that are useful and best for everyone around you, but also realize that a lot of what we do isn't something that we really have choices about, and learn to be kind and try and understand how the world shapes us, and how all of us don't really have as many choices as we think we have. So that's what I would like to say.
Thank you, Professor Fred.
Thank you, Sharif.
Professor Fred, what's your concluding remarks?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yogi Berra, the baseball player who was famous for malapropisms, he simplified this whole matter. He said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. This session has been just terrifically stimulating. It's been one of the best. We've heard perspectives from physics, biology, various branches of philosophy, even theology. And whenever I meet a theology major, if I may gently tease, I ask theoretical or experimental. Here, I think we have almost a mandate to be experimental because there are so many mysteries remaining to us about the nature of free will. But what I get out of this discussion is that we should act as if we do have free will. Even if we don't know whether we have it or not, we should act as if we do. I want to finish with referring back to another Aikido story. Decades ago, my teacher, who was a Japanese, asked me to do something, and I kind of weakly replied, "Okay, I'll try." And he just stared at me. So I tried a line from Star Wars. I said, "Oh, okay, Sensei, I get it. There's no try. There's only do or don't do." And he said, "That's right, but there's also intention." So I had to start to really think about what is intention. And of course, that ties in with free will also. But I turned up some neurological research that showed something extremely odd and thought-provoking, and that is that our cerebral cortex censors our impulses to speech or to action, but it doesn't originate them. Okay, experiments. Okay, here's experiments allow subjects to self-report the moment of decision about whether to move their finger or not. And this is like Donald said about raising your cup of coffee. These experiments showed that the nerve signals to the finger were on their way well before the reported instant of deciding to move the finger. Okay, in other words, then the nerves were, the message to move your finger was sent before you think you decided to move your finger. Wow. Okay, so where does the original impulse to move your finger come from? Does it come from some part of your brain that you're unaware of, like the limbic system? Or does it come from, the mind of God or some telepathic connection with the great mind of the universe? We don't know that. And so the question of free will is still terrifically deep and thought-provoking. But yeah, from all the perspectives described today, I think we just need to act as if we do have it and do our best in life.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Mark, what's your concluding remarks?
Get myself off of mute for one thing, but yeah, the concluding remarks is actually I was listening to the last gentleman and everything, and one of the things I was going to say is that definitely we have some connection to others that are out there. I definitely believe that I still have a connection, and definitely that can be part of free will as well with those that would be considered the ancestors, because I am definitely one that believes in having that connection with those that have gone on and they are part of the tapestry of us, meaning the tapestry of people. So definitely there is free will, but that free will is influenced by things that are around us, including some of the decisions that we choose to make, kind of like the examples that I gave earlier. And mostly we try to make, at least I think most people do, conscious and good decisions and positive decisions, but we are influenced by things that are around us, like Mother Nature and like a number of other things that are in that space, and of course the environment around us. I was going to ask that one other gentleman that was talking about Georgia and Georgians and that whole area. Does that mean that there are a lot more Carolines in Carolina? Because we definitely know that that exists, and I'm wondering what the studies have said about that as well. But definitely, I am a believer in free will, and I think that that is something that we all need to be doing on a regular basis and all along those lines. But that's my conclusion.
Thank you,
Another
Mr.
show
Yasin.
as well, so y'all might be hearing some noise in the background now. But that is my thoughts, and I'm going to conclude on that note.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's session. This is really great discussions, and it creates some interesting thoughts. Definitely, it will be helpful for our audience, especially the youth community from Asia Pacific. Thank you, Professor David Schumacher. Thank you, Mr. Adam. Thank you, Mr. Donalds and Mr. Martley. Thank you. Bye bye, and take care.